Welcome to the Heroic Minds podcast, where we uncover the heroic stories of individuals battling through adversity and rising to the top of professional sport, business, and life. Uncovering the characteristics, the secrets, the tactics to become the hero of your own story, because it is adversity that maximizes human potential. Welcome back to the Heroic Minds podcast. On today's episode, we have a familiar face back on the show, Ian Bigford, who, as we know in the past, philosophy major, finishing up his MBA, had a consulting business in Australia, which is a story in itself that maybe might come up on this podcast one day. But he's been helping me with this whole journey with Heroic Minds and has the same goals and dreams in building this thing up to continue to get these stories out there and continue to empower people. And the emails are picking up and everything's going in such an exciting direction that we figured, you know what, let's have another chat on the podcast. And I want people to hear Ian speak because he's so insightful and it's the philosophy he learned in school is just a spot on the map compared to what he learns on his own every day because of his passion for philosophy and human development. So in this episode, that's the main topic is, and I won't give away too much, but the main idea is that we have the ability to control our attitude. And when we put forth our best approach to different things, that's when things just seem to go better. And one of the examples that comes up in the episode is a rainy day or a cold day. We have the ability to control our attitude in this situation, which in turn is going to affect how we perceive things in our life, how we continue to have energy or we don't have energy. You know, if you approach that rainy day with, oh, this is terrible, I can't do anything, you're probably not going to have as much energy. Your output then won't be as valuable and the snowball effect continues. I split this episode into two parts. One, because I've seen other podcasts do it and it seems like a cool idea. I've heard it's a cool thing to do. So testing that out. The other reason is because the first part is dialogue. We're just chatting about this exact topic that I just opened with. And then the part two is a poem that I believe can benefit anyone. And I truly mean that. And the reason I'm sharing the poem is because Ian has started a project on the Heroic Minds website called the Mind Manual, and I encourage you to check it out. I put a link to it in the description of this episode. It's basically him breaking down and simplifying these high-level philosophy, neuroscience ideas and putting them into simple, digestible format, and it's really empowering. They're all written in an empowering way for you to improve in various ways. So it's the Mind Manual. That's why Ian's on today. We're talking all things that he's talked about in that Mind Manual blog space so far, which has been a ton of cool ideas. So I hope you enjoy this. A couple things before we get going here. One, keep the emails coming. I truly appreciate that. Sharing your story, opening up, constructive criticisms. I love it. If you disagree with a topic, even on this podcast, I encourage the response. I think those are the conversations we need to have, again, that we usually avoid. So if you disagree or you want to take a conversation further, send me an email. The other thing is, if you are enjoying these episodes, as things continue to move in the right direction, if you want to leave a positive review on the platform in which you listen to this podcast, I encourage that as well. Also in the description of this episode, a link to purchase Heroic Minds shirts for pre-order. So those will be shipped out December 15th. So if you want to order a shirt, black shirt, white logo, men's and women's, polyester and cotton, check out the link attached to this episode, and those will be shipped out again on December 15th. Lastly, and most important, check out truelocal.ca. High quality meat, individually packaged, shipped to your doorstep. And beyond the meat, I think you can tell on social media and the way they treat me, and they've treated people that have used the discount code and ordered their meat. It feels like it doesn't even feel like a business relationship. It just feels like a friendship. You know, they put handwritten letters in your box. Their customer service is incredible. They're open to new ideas. I've even reached out about different meats they could provide with potential different local farmers that I even know and tried to connect them with them. And they said, yeah. And now they're connected with these other local farmers. So they're very innovative and they're a great company, and their product is above and beyond. It's incredible. The meat, I'm telling you, like I've always said, you won't go back to the regular meats that you've had. They go out and handpick these high quality meats and individually package them, and it shows up at your doorstep. It's awesome. Check them out and use my discount code HeroicMinds25, all capital letters, to get $25 off a regular size box and $10 off an individual size box. Alrighty, here we go. So we're actually more, as humans, likely to use emotional thought versus rational. That's just a default that we have. And I thought that was a cool idea.
Yeah, there's a book definitely worth checking out for anybody who wants to read more deeply into it. It was a New York Times bestseller, and it was written by a guy who won a Nobel Prize in behavioral economics, which, I mean, they don't give out Nobel Prizes very often, so it's certainly impressive. And it's called Thinking Fast and Slow, and there's a lot in that book, but generally speaking, that concept that he's pointing out seems to be true about the human mind, which is that we have the ability to think fast and we have the ability to think slow. And when we're thinking fast, it's an evolved process for our brain to quickly make decisions that are for our benefit, typically speaking, in a sort of evolutionary sense. Our thinking slow faculties are very inefficient, but they're also our most powerful. So when you think about thinking slow, those are the processes where you're trying to solve a complex math problem, or you're trying to make a decision about ambiguous outcome, like, I don't know, like, should I make this investment or not, and things along that line. It's the careful, slow, logical deliberation, and we all know that that's exhausting for anybody who's had to, say, write a really long, complex test or something. It's that faculty, and it uses up a lot of the brain's resources. With thinking fast, though, is very efficient. So it takes no time, it takes no energy, and your brain can make a lot of decisions a lot faster. It is what is responsible for the gut feeling. So the part of our brain that's able to think fast is able to also take in a lot more information and focus on a lot more at once. If you ever feel like awkwardness in a situation, or that maybe somebody isn't having a great time at a party, that feeling comes from thinking fast, because your brain's taking in all sorts of information that doesn't consciously register to give you an emotional sense for what needs to happen. So when you're thinking fast, the information gets delivered in a emotional way, whether it be through physiological drives like hunger, or whether it be sort of social, like, oh, I should go say something to that person, or oh, I should apologize for this. All of that is thinking fast. The point he makes in the book is that when we're thinking fast, though, by definition, our perceptions have simplified the environment to basically pursue a particular goal, and that goal isn't registered. So for instance, you might not articulate that, your goal in the morning is to remain comfortable. It just feels emotionally like you don't want to get out of bed, but your brain has given you that goal, and it's kind of that, we know, that battle to get up in the morning early or whatever. It's that's what's happening, is that your thinking slow brain knows that logically planning for the future, you need to get up early so you can get to work or get your workout in before you do your day. But your thinking fast brain is far more short-term gratification oriented, and it'll align your emotions along that way of thinking. So that's kind of the basic concept.
And so then the issue that comes with that concept today, is it the tasks today are so much more complex than they used to be, and that is when our brain became the way it is today. So it's almost functioning in a sense of those quick decisions that we're not carefully deliberating. Is that one of the issues?
So, I mean, I think I know where you're going. I think you're kind of going to get into the fact that we're so distracted, stimulated, and that seems to have an effect on our ability to focus, pay attention, and deliberate carefully. And actually, we can talk about meditation in a bit too. It's almost become a cliche at this point. Everybody talks about it so much, but yeah, I mean, so there's no doubt the world's extremely complex now. We're so far removed from physical work, typically speaking, not all of us, but there was a time where that was pretty much the only kind of work you could get, whether it was laying tracks or building, buildings in a city, things like that, being a tradesperson or whatever. But now it's very abstract, and furthermore, the landscape has become so complex. Like, I mean, now we have the awareness and the, really you have to start to think so much in the future, and the thinking fast brain cannot do that very well. It's this thinking slow brain that says, we keep on hanging out in this one spot. Maybe we should build a roof, and maybe we should build a fire, because that would mean that in 2 hours when it gets cold, we're going to be warm. It's the thinking slow brain that's responsible for pretty much everything that we would classify as smart decisions. And then the thinking fast brain is the one that's kind of, it fools us a lot because we don't really have much control over it. And in the blog post, I go into a bit of a brief evolutionary history of why that's the case. It's quite simply because we spent a lot more time as other creatures than we did as human beings. So obviously the one thing that distinguishes us from other creatures is that we can think and deliberate, and we're very intelligent, but we spent more time as monkeys and crustaceans and other things like that. And so those creatures need nervous systems that are going to self-preserve beyond anything else. And so it's constantly scanning for, where can I get more food? Do I have a social threat? Is there a existential threat from another creature? Do I have the fight or flight systems programmed properly so that when there's a threat, I can respond faster than I can think? All those things.
So then I'm getting or starting to figure out that the more we can think slow, and maybe is that really a conscious decision even, I wonder? Can we decide, I'm going to think slower on this one? Like, yes, we find times where it's like, okay, I got to put some more thought into this. Is that something we can consciously do, or can we just practice thinking slower? And again, maybe it's the meditation concept that then we just naturally utilize in certain situations. Because I would almost put this, I like to compare things to sport, but it's the game of hockey happens so fast, and it's the individual that's calm enough to wait that extra half second that can make that pass, and people would be like, wow, look at the poise or composure on that player. That's why he or she is at the level they're at, because the game's so fast. But those that can be composed, as opposed to the one that thinks fast and moves the puck for that short-term gain of maybe avoiding a check, versus the individual that waits that extra half second, maybe has to take a hit but makes a better play. I don't know. That's what I kind of... Is it a point where we want to be able to think slower more often?
It seems that... So one of the things that characterizes intelligence is actually a great ability to focus on things for a long period of time, and that is, by definition, thinking slow. We all know that we can, our attention can be pulled emotionally, but we can direct it also consciously. And in the post that I wrote, it's called the executive control of a function of the mind. And you can think of a little, in your rational brain, your thinking slow brain, there's like a little, executive there kind of that's able to snap things into alignment in terms of your emotions and all your drives. You do have the conscious ability to calm the rest of your mind so that you can focus on what's ahead of you, but sort of in the way that you experience that, it's often through calming down, slowing down, stepping off the line, so to speak, where everybody's got their head in the game and they're being carried away by the momentum of things, and everybody losing their mind. It's the person that can slow down, step off the line, and have a look and say, okay, so here's what's actually going on, and think about it. They talk about that in the military too, where it's the guy that can step off the firing line and look around that can make the smart choices as to how they should maneuver next. So definitely, like, if we could all be perfectly focused at all times and doing calculations on everything all the time, then that would be great. The problem with the thinking slow brain is that it's very inefficient, as I mentioned, which means that it can't absorb as much information. So the thing about the thinking slow brain is you have to give it a clearly defined intention, and that gets into goal setting really quick, because you don't know what you don't know, and because you don't know the future and necessarily what is going to be relevant for the future, you have to be very clear on what you're trying to do when you're thinking. And when you sit down to intentionally do something, you have to be very clear about it, because otherwise you'll lose focus.
So let's get into the goal setting then. So basically the value of having a goal isn't necessarily you need to visualize it and have it on the wall. It's so that the decisions you make can then give you, your decisions are then affected by what will bring me closer to that goal. When should I think fast? When should I think slow? When should I move faster? That's why you need that goal. And if you don't have a clearly defined goal, especially like clearly defined, this is how I need to get there. Going back to a topic that comes up a lot on this podcast, is you also have to know exactly where you are and accept the situation you're in, and know that goal. So you really need, the middle will figure itself out. I'm almost visualizing this in my mind, but that beginning point and that end point has to be super clearly defined and understood.
Yeah, it does. It needs to be defined and understood. It has to actually incur you actually have to believe that you want the benefit of that goal. Like you have to, visualization's an interesting thing because it's basically voluntary fantasy. It's imagining how great it would actually be to have something, and then from there you create your plan as to what behaviors it might take to get to that place. In terms of how that works with your mind, I just want to make the one point that we act out all sorts of goals that we don't know we have. That's kind of the way the thinking fast brain works, is when you decide it's time to go for a meal, that's you acting out a micro goal that your thinking fast brain has served up to you on a platter, saying, emotionally you're like feeling hunger, maybe you have some hunger pangs. We know how long humans can go without food. You don't need that for survival, but it's to sort of just keep you going, right? It's a goal that might be habituated, but certainly humans can go about 2 to 3 weeks without food before they starve to death, and that's if they're starting at a pretty lean weight to begin with. So you think about this and think about the thinking slow brain and the deliberate goals we want to make, whether it's, okay, I'm going to eat out once every 2 months instead of once every month or once every week or whatever, because if I do that, then I'll have enough cash to make an investment that'll then propagate over time and lead to a long-term benefit I'm after. To do that, you have to really have a good nest of reasons around, and also a good nest of fantasies around why that goal is way more beneficial than what you're acting out.
So then it feels like what you're saying would keep someone motivated on their task toward that goal, because like I could see how you have that end goal, and for the first two, we all, I want to say we all, and that's a terrible thing to say because you don't put everyone under the same umbrella, but I'd say many people it's like the first day of school. I remember I think from grade 4 to grade 8, you get your new pens, your new notebooks. You're like, this is the year. I'm going to raise all my marks by 10%. I'm going to be so good. Even in high school, university, start September, you're going to be the smartest kid in class, and you're going to turn the leaf. You're going to do all your homework. And then you get to October and it's like, I'll finish that assignment later. I'll do half my homework. So it's almost the idea of having that clear defined goal, having clear defined reasons and understanding of why you want that goal that you have to also understand to then keep that motivation going beyond just September in school.
Yeah, and I think the motivation's different, right? You have to a good way to think about it is it's the difference between candy and like good real food. It's like candy is delicious in the short term, but in the long term you feel terrible if you have a ton of it. But good food will make you feel good for an extended period of time. It's kind of like that's the problem with how we conceive motivation, is we always think it's that feeling you have after you watched a motivational video and you're just so fired up. That's not what motivation's like for long-term goals. It's way quieter, way more subtle in your experience of it. Because it's actually a different brain chemical. It's not dopamine driven, it's serotonin driven. And so it's driven by this sense of progress, this sense of kind of thinking that hey, I set out a plan, I'm doing the plan, and it's working. That gives just sort of a quiet contentness, fulfillment that you're going about this in the right way, and you've mapped reality well enough to know that what plan would work, and you're acting out the behaviors necessary for that goal. But it's a very subtle thing. I think we got to watch the sort of, when we talk about these things, I think a lot of people think that they should feel motivated every day when they show up to do their thing. And it's like, we know that that's not true. I mean, you know, NHL players, it's like there were days where, you know, they know they're going to show up at the rink and they're going to do that same stupid little drill in the corner because they need to work on that because it's their biggest weakness. And if only they can tie that up, then their whole game's going to come together in a different way, maybe take them to the next level. But they're so sick of dealing with this problem, right? And so is that motivation? Or is that discipline? Or what's the right word there? And that's where, you know, I think we're going to get into the issue with thinking about bringing yourself into it too much and instead just focusing on the behaviors that'll lead to where you want to go.
Right.
And we can talk about that, yeah.
To start getting into that, I guess, is, I mean, I found that serotonin point interesting because it can give someone reason when they don't feel motivated, that if I do the things I don't want to have to do, maybe right now, like I want that arrow bar instead of the healthy bar that tastes, or the salad, or that doesn't taste as good, knowing deep down that there's actually going to be a scientific, you know, there's proof to this, that yeah, right now it's but tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. when I'm going for my morning run, I'm going to be running on that healthy bar that's giving me more efficient fuel than those sugars that are slowing me down, right? Like to realize that's tough in the moment, but if you can remind yourself that on a scientific level, there's going to be a release of something tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. that's going to give me my payoff. Like that's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, there's people are able to do incredible things. We know that from just some of the history and wars and terrible conflict that has created many heroic stories in the past. People can put up with having very little feedback, like positive feedback in the pursuance of their goal. Like we know that people need such little hope to keep going, and it's important to know that you're not, you know, a dog. You don't need a reward at every turn. But what we're kind of talking about when we talk about the difference between serotonin and dopamine is we're talking about the experience of serotonin is so subtle and so quiet that like it's. You by definition are no longer going for the incentive reward high. It's like, okay, I did this thing and then I get paid, or I did this thing, I get the reward. Like, here we go. It's not so high and low. It's way more steady. And it's the same case with your emotions in relation to your goal. It's like, we all know when we're trying to create a new habit okay, first 3 days, you've got the dopaminergic motivation where we got some vigor, but maybe end of day 3, we don't get as much sleep, we don't eat the way we should, we kind of, you know, screw off a little bit, and then by day 4, you're like, okay, I'm not doing this thing, I'm not quitting caffeine or whatever it is, right? Like I'm gonna, you know, veto my goal for short-term benefit, and that whole idea is of the serotonin is like, okay, once you get past that, now the high of like, I'm doing this thing's going to drop off. So what's left within you to push forward? Is it really a spiritual thing, or do you just have to continue to repeat the behaviors? And I would argue it's the latter. I would argue it's a repetition of behaviors. It's about removing the ego from the picture and saying, look, your goals are literally just a function of how you act. It's not a function of how you feel inside necessarily. It's not that we want to completely ignore the inner experience, but it is the idea that we can get in our way. We can make a simple act like getting out of bed such a bigger problem than it is, when really we know exactly all it is. It's okay, you're laying down, you come awake, whether it be from your alarm clock or otherwise, and all you have to do is stand up. That's it. You just have to, you know, turn over and stand up. That's mechanistically the behavior you're looking for. But so often people get into the sort of mind space where it's like this spiritual battle within their own being. And it's like, okay, I need to get the discipline and the fortitude and the character, and I need to be that person that says, I will do that thing that nobody else will do today. And that's like triggering that dopamine, like I need to feel motivated to do my goals, when my experience has been actually trying to enact a habit or you know, change something about yourself. It's looking at the mechanisms, like the mechanistic behavior that you want to you know, have on yourself. And so what I've kind of come to the conclusion about is that let's say you want to be more disciplined and you want to get up earlier in the morning. There is no such thing as disciplined people, just people with disciplined behaviors. It's a totally different point, because when I say there's no such thing as disciplined people, that's me saying there's no such thing as that identity. There's just people that have more disciplined behaviors across their life than you. We then infer that means their whole identity is disciplined, but of course we know the person that's really disciplined at, say, work might not be that disciplined at their diet. Nobody's a disciplined person. What does that mean? That means that they're disciplined in every single corner of their life, and that's
right.
Who's there? I can't say that I am, right? So that's kind of the point, is that it's about the behaviors, and it's about just getting out of your own mental way and just saying, okay, what's the behavior that needs to happen here? It's a very detached look at things, but at the end of the day, if you have goals, that's the way that you kind of calm down the internal noise to allow yourself to get out of your way, to allow yourself to face the actual adversity that's exterior to yourself. Because if the noise inside is like 80% and it takes up 80% of your capacity, then you only have like 20% to work with to actually deal with problems outside of yourself. The goal is to turn down the internal noise so you have all of your capabilities and capacities available to deal with the world. And then you'll make better decisions and do better.
So, like, that's easy. That's seems easier said than done, but I've also never heard it worded that way. So if we use that example of it's 6 a.m, alarm goes off, it's -30 outside for our listeners that are in the cold climate that we're just heading into now. Or it's doing something at work that you don't want to have to do, or you went to the photocopier that's on the floor below you came up, you forgot 2 sheets, I'll grab them after work if they're still there, kind of thing, but realizing I should go grab them right now, even though I'm gassed, I missed lunch. Is there a mental process or a plan in place that would be an efficient way for people to start applying this to their life? Like, what would that look like?
Yeah, so this is where, okay, anybody who's tried or read Stoicism or Buddhism or meditated, at least the people that have tried to do it somewhat deeply and apply it across their life, most of them, I have to say like 9 out of 10 of them have run into the same issue of, like, when you try to be so stoic, so calm, so indifferent, and so calculated, you start to lose the sense of sufficient meaning, sufficient excitement, sufficient drive for what you're doing. And there's a pragmatic philosopher called William James. He's an American, he was an American philosopher, and he founded the philosophical school of thought of pragmatism. And I think he talked about the additional component here, which is actually the starter, the component that gets all of these behaviors in line, and that's attitude. So you have your behaviors, you have your goals, you know what you want to do, but we all know that experience of, like, okay, I know I should do that, I just don't feel like it. William James, when he first started writing about it, he's one of the first to actually write about positive thinking. And that whole concept has just been completely twisted by, self-help gurus and things like that over the ages. And so a lot of people throw out the baby with the bathwater. But the way he wrote about it was definitely not, naively optimistic. He just noticed, and this is the exact quote he used, was that some people seem to come out of the womb with 2 bottles of champagne to their credit, while others seem to come out of the womb abundantly aware of the evil of the world. And the claim that he made was that the people who were on the bright side of that equation, whatever that is, seemed to live better lives. They realized more of their potential. They made better social relationships. They achieved more of their goals. And the people on the other side of the equation, they didn't suffer so he actually said that they had a better understanding of the reality of the world, but that they didn't realize their potential as much. They didn't go for things. They had worse relationships. And so he started developing this philosophy of what he called healthy mindedness. And it's this whole idea of the attitude is the thing that is the cause for the inertia towards action. Because the example of waking up in the morning is a question of how do you just get started. We know with projects, with work, with workouts, the hardest thing to do is to get started, but once you're in the flow of it, it just kind of starts going. So then the question becomes, what is that forcing function that gets the inertia, the initial motion going? And for James, that was attitude, and I tend to agree with him, actually. And so he characterized attitude as kind of being like, well, what an attitude is, technically speaking, is you pay attention to certain things and not other things. It's a simplification of the world, and it's a conscious one that chooses to focus on this and not that. And so for him, for the healthy-minded individual, they focused on the good in things. So that was the good that's concepts like gratitude. Like, I'm so lucky to, you can reduce this down to really simple levels that actually Viktor Frankl, when he was in Auschwitz, did. He tried to feel gratitude for breath, for being alive. Even though he was in the worst Nazi concentration camp during the Second World War, he still endeavored to have gratitude. And for him, he thanked God for life and for being alive, and then he said, help me get through the horrible situation. But for James, what he noticed was that so having a good attitude, just like, let that kind of seed plant itself, having a good attitude towards things. Well, kind of think about what that would look like. If I woke up in the morning and I had a good attitude towards my job, I had a good attitude towards my workouts and my goals, what kind of things would I say to myself? It's like, okay, well, like, hey, if I get up this morning, I can go and work out, and that's going to make me stronger, and that's going to make me achieve whatever physical goals I have. And hey, if I show up with a smile on my face and I have a can-do attitude at work, that my team's going to, rely on me, and I'm going to get more responsibility, and maybe, that'll lead to more prosperity for myself, my team in the future, and that'll be great, But it's about having that good attitude to begin with. It's like a good attitude towards things, and then a good attitude towards people, right? So you also see this sometimes where it's like we kind of write people off sometimes as this guy's okay. That's an attitude that you choose to have. You don't have to choose that attitude. You could say, hey, this person goes through lots of stuff just like I do. Their moods go up and down like mine does, but generally speaking, this I kind of have a positive regard for people. Like, it's a helpful way to think. And so I really think that this sort of attitude of like endeavoring to look at things through a standpoint of like joy, endeavoring to look through the standpoint of what's good about things, will lead to you actually being excited and somewhat have that serotonin experience of like, hey, I'm progressing. If I get up and I just do this thing, I'm moving towards my goal. It's not like that candy dopamine hit, like I'm gonna, whatever. It's not that short-term motivation. It's like, I'm taking a good attitude towards my lot in life, and I'm gonna make it better because of that good attitude.
And is that attitude reinforced or furthered by that clear goal that we talked about? Like, really, is it easier to get to that gratifying feeling or enjoying that serotonin release that you do get probably 2 or 3 days after you've actually done the task, that benefit? Is that easier to get to when you have that clear defined goal?
Yes, this is, maybe we should have started with attitude, to be honest, but it for James, and I agree with him, once you have the healthy-minded attitude, the good attitude towards life, then your goals start to get painted for you. Because now you have the joy, the zest in life. Another way to describe it is people are high on life. Now they start to look at their life and say, what would be awesome? What would be better? What would be fun? What would be exciting? What would be good for the long term, right? And then they start to actually paint long-term goals that require delayed gratification out of that attitude. It's because the attitude, again, is taking your perceptions, weaning them down to the best possible part of your experience, and then that helps change how you respond to everything in your environment. It's not so where the positive thinkers of today get it wrong, this is just an aside, but it's kind of funny, is they say the positive attitude's going to change things. It's not going to change things. It's going to change how you respond to things. And that's a really important difference, because that's all you can control. It's how you respond to what happens. And so, there are some people that experience adversity and they completely crumble because, they don't make the voluntary conscious choice to have a good attitude. And that's what it is. It's never the default. You have to realize it's a choice to see the best in things. And it takes sort of a little bit of spiritual fortitude to do that, because sometimes things get really bad.
See, a lot of people would think, I feel like a lot of people would think, well, that's just their attitude, or that's just my attitude towards things. And then they brush it off, and it just either grows as an issue or stays in the back of their minds as an issue they have that they're not willing to deal with. And I'm not going to get into this point, but it's similar to, I would think, the idea that, and things we've discussed on this podcast with Wally and Barack about minorities and how they're treated, and just entertaining, those ideas in your mind that are pushed to the back. They still stay there as issues. They're not benefiting you to have these, and I'll put quote unquote default negative assumptions towards minorities because you don't understand them or haven't taken the time to.
Right.
You could relate that to issues as well. I'm in sport. We'll go back to that example. I'm not good at having the puck in the corner there, so I'm just going to avoid it, or if it happens, whatever, I'll just apologize if it doesn't work out. Like, having those natural defaults, people brush it off as, well, that's just me, I can't change that. And this makes me realize, yes, we can. And is it going to be a challenge, and is it going to suck? Yeah, it might, but it is a choice, and when you continue to make that choice.
James's observation about this, he actually did write about this point, oddly enough, which was that he likened it to when you're like a baby and you first learn that you can move your own hand, then it stops becoming such a mystery that you can do that. For James, he actually thought that for attitude, we don't default know that we can change it until we kind of realize that we can. Like, just make the decision to, hey, I'm going to focus on what's good. I'm going to focus on trying to have some joy and try to optimize towards some positivity here and some optimism. And and that's not about good situations. Like, oh, I only focus on the positive. It's like, no, this problem's affecting us. Awesome. We have this opportunity to show everybody that we can solve it, and we absolutely can solve it. It's in that way, it's sort of toting the line of naivety, but also that naivety enables you to get knocked down and stand back up over and over and over again, because you're just willing to just keep going. Whereas the pessimist is the one that's always looking for the perfect opportunity, and they're too careful, and because they're realists, and they know how bad the world is, and they know how unlikely success is, and so they're only going to step up to the plate when they think they're going to get
the ideal outcome. Yes, right? Exactly.
And so there's a real practical subtlety there about the optimist who's just willing to, no matter what, just step up to the plate, even if they know like the chances are
coming.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they don't know what's going to be pitched their way, but it's the optimism, and it's the joy, and it's the love of things and the love of people that keep them like, hey, we can really make something great here, right? And so that keeps them going. And so for James, he really thought that, once you realized your ability to control your attitude and just focus on a good attitude no matter external circumstances, then he thought your goals started to become clearer, and they started to feel better. They started to feel real. When you're sort of people have nihilistic attitudes about where they're going in life, they can set goals, they can write them down, and it might actually look pretty good for them, and then you're just like, but it doesn't feel real for them. It doesn't feel like it really make a difference, because for James, he thought that this was because the core issue was the sick soul, we called it, which was the opposite of the healthy-minded attitude. He thought that was the thing that they were really trying to solve for, but they hadn't realized their own capability of changing their attitudes, right. And that's what it is. And so to bring it a little bit full circle to the behavior, mechanistic look at your goals, it's once you have the good attitude, and then that paints the goals for the long-term gratification goals, that then you can say, hey, look, I have this joy in life, I have this zest for life, I'm excited for what could happen if I do these behaviors, if I do these disciplined behaviors or do these hard things. I'm excited to see what happens. And it's kind of funny, we're here in the Toronto area, and we had some snow this past week, and it was kind of interesting. You can play with your mind sometimes and just see what happens. I realized that when the snow first falls, everybody kind of gets that wince on their face when they're out walking on the street. They're trying to avoid the puddles, and fair enough. And the snow is kind of blowing in their face, and it's somewhat unpleasant because you just came off of summer as far as Canadians are concerned, and it was beautiful out just a couple of weeks ago. And so what I realized though is that what is all this wincing and like discomfort? I realized, like, in my experience of trying to choose my attitude, what would it look like if I took a good attitude towards this weather? Like we kind of get it sort of beaten into us that rain is bad in Western society, and like, oh, I don't want to get wet, or I don't want to get cold, or I don't want to catch a cold, or I don't want to freeze my hands off or whatever. But it was kind of like, well, what would a good attitude look like towards the snow right now? Like, what if I behaved the same way that I did when it's 35 and sunny out, right? And so I kind of just decided to take that posture and think, oh, you know what? The snow kind of looks really lovely, and it's kind of beautiful out, and it's a change in seasons, and it's natural. And then the wind on my face, and I was kind of underdressed too, and I didn't have any gloves on, and so you kind of stop losing feeling in your hands. And I kind of, because I had that attitude, I kind of was just like, oh, it's a change in feeling in my hand, but I didn't immediately jump to the conclusion that was such a bad thing. I knew I wasn't going to get frostbite or something. It wasn't going to be catastrophic. So why do I care? It's like, I'm out here and I spend all day in like an office. This is great.
I feel like it sounds like, I know that experience 100%. And I feel like you almost are observing things without judging them as much as we would if we're in that opposite, or we will say default kind of approach, is that now you're internalizing it, and, oh, my hands are cold, which means this will happen and this will happen. And that wasn't how your thoughts were in that moment, because you approached it a different way. So I was just observing, okay, yeah, my hands feel different than they did 10 minutes ago. Probably should have worn gloves. Let's just keep walking. This is beautiful.
Right.
And now it's not internalized, and it doesn't negatively affect you as much as it could have. Is it still unfortunate? Yeah. But it's not as unfortunate as it could have been.
It's not even clear that it's unfortunate. That's kind of my point, is that, like, when you're kind of like, I got to drag myself to work, and I got to walk outside, it's snowing out. Like, you start with that attitude, and now how much do you feel that suffering of the coldness of your hands? It's horrible. Right? Whereas, like, having a good attitude towards what you're doing and where you're going, and the fact you're able to be outside and all the rest, you often hear when they talk about meditation, it's non-judgmental observance of your, whatever circumstances. And I think that's great, but I think that is still not the sort of head of the stream.
Because that would still be affected by those outside of, this attitudes. Is negative, this is positive, this is negative.
Exactly. Right. It's still your attitudes. They're not talking about your attitude. They're just talking about, like, okay, observe your thoughts non-judgmentally. It's like, I don't think you can choose to do that if you have a bad attitude.
And it's also, I would say, if someone said, they say, put yourself imagine yourself, on a field. And of course you're going to feel great on the field in sun, imagining yourself in a sunny day. Right. Imagine they said, okay, I want you to meditate and find joy, and close your eyes and think if you're in the middle of a snowstorm because your car broke down and you don't have gloves. Now find calm. Yeah. That's almost maybe that's an interesting practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So James considered himself a philosopher and a psychologist, and he actually saw some patients and stuff like that. He had an MD from Harvard, so he was technically a doctor, but he wasn't a very good student. Anyway, he saw patients and stuff, and he started to use this attitude-based psychology to help people out of ruts where it was like, okay, here we have an able-bodied young man who just seems to fall into alcoholism and not show up to work on time and not be there for his family. And it's like, he's got the physical faculties to do all that, but his mind is kind of messed up. And for James, he was like, it's his attitude. And, obviously we don't want to say depression, anxiety, all these things are completely driven by attitude. They're multivariate problems. But for a lot of us, I think, where we're maybe not in the range of like clinical anxiety or depression, but we know we could do better, but just there are so many times where we just know what we should do, we just don't feel like doing it. I think this could be a useful philosophy for those instances.
That brings us to the end of part 1 of this podcast. So I encourage you to check out part 2, where we break down If by Rudyard Kipling, a poem that can benefit anyone. I truly believe that Ian and I break it down line by line and give examples of how you can apply these ideas to your own life. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again soon.